Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another live session. So, we're going to go through the sexual reproduction in flowering plants. As most of you are aware, that I'm going to take this chapter through assertion and reasoning. As you know, this is the best way to revise the entire chapter, where all the topics will be covered. So, without any wasting time, let's jump on to the class and let's see the first question. Thank you. The cost of hybrid seeds become too expensive for the farmers. Yes, they are too expensive. Why? It's a very simple question to start off. Those are costly. So both the statements are true and it is the right explanation. There isn't much from my side, okay, to explain in this particular question. Let's see the second one. Parthenium, which is also called as carrot grass. Okay, the full name is Parthenium hysterocarpus, which belongs to the family Asteraceae. Came into India as a contaminant with imported wheat, which is true. Parthenium has become ubiquitous in occurrence and causes pollen energy, which is true. So, but it is not explaining the statement. So I would go with B as the answer. Both of these are true and okay, it is not explaining in detail how it has become contaminant. Next, mature seeds may be non-albuminous or ex-albuminous, which is true. Let's see the reason. Albuminous seeds have no residual endosperm as it is completely consumed during embryo development. If it is completely used, we don't call it as albuminous, we rather call it as ex-albuminous. So this statement, reason statement as such, is false. See over here, albuminous seeds have no residual endosperm as it is completely consumed during embryo development. Albuminous means they will have, but he's saying that it is completely used, then it becomes ex-albuminous. So the statement is wrong. So the third question answer will be the third option, that is assertion is true and reason is false. Assertion is true and reason is false. Okay, let's jump on to the next question. The wall of the ovary after fertilization develops into the wall of the fruit, which is true. The wall of the ovary after fertilization develops into the fruit, okay, wall called as pericarp, which is again divided into epicarp, mesocarp and endocarp. So the pericarp is again divided into epicarp, mesocarp and endocarp, which is true as a statement. Let's see the third reason. The fruits may be dry as in guava, orange, mango, etc., or may be fleshy as in groundnut and mustard. Okay, the entire reason is the other way around. See the first half of the statement. The fruits may be dry as in guava. Have you ever seen guava, dry guava? No, it is fleshy fruit. Orange is fleshy. Mango is fleshy. Okay, so the reason statement as such is a false one. The reason statement as such is a false one. Okay, so then what will be our answer? Assertion is true and reason is false. Assertion is true and reason as such is false. Let's go to the next question. Pollination does not guarantee the transfer of compatible pollen of the same species as the stigma. You know, pollination, okay, it is not specific. Through air, several hundreds of pollens will be traveling. So it is not mandatory a specific pollen will definitely come and fall onto the stigma of the flower. For example, imagine this is the stigma and this particular flower is air pollinated one. So there in the air, there will be hundreds of pollen grains. There will be hundreds of pollen grains. And any one of these pollen grain can fall on the stigma it is not mandatory that only that specific pollen grain will fall onto the stigma. Clear? Whether it receives or not, that is a different question altogether. So the first one I will go with false, because pollination, I'm sorry, it is right, it doesn't guarantee the transfer. Pollination means just landing, fertilization is the second step. Clear? So the first statement is true. Let's see the second one. What does it state? The pistil has the ability to recognize the pollen whether it is of the right type or of the wrong type. Right type is called as compatible, and the wrong type is incompatible, which is written the other way around, and moreover it is the stigma that recognizes. So I will go this as false. The reason will be false. So what will be the answer? Again C. Assertion is true and reason is false. Assertion is true and reason is false. Is it clear, guys? Hello? Let's go for the next question. The microsporangia develop and become pollen sacs in anther. So if you see the anther structure over here, so you know these three corners is called as microsporangia. Once this anther matures, what does it becomes? This microsporangia, once the anther becomes mature, it becomes the pollen sac, which is absolutely true. And that's what the statement, assertion statement is saying. The microsporangia develop and become pollen sac in anther. True. Let's see the reason. A typical angiosperm anther is bilobed with each lobe having two theca. That is, they are tetrathecous. No, until this particular point over here, the statement is true. But he says it is tetrathecous. No, it is dithecous. Clear? Dithecous and tetrasporangiate. That is the actual statement of NCERT. So it is what? Dithecous and tetrasporangiate. This should have been the statement. So the answer will be, the answer is assertion is true and reason is false. Assertion is true and reason is false. Next one. A breeder is interested in crossing different species and often genera of plants to combine desirable characters to produce commercially superior varieties, which is true. A breeder is interested in crossing different species or often genera of plants to combine desirable characters to produce commercially superior varieties, which is true. Let's see the reason statement. Artificial hybridization is one of the major approaches of the crop improvement program. As you can see, many of the vegetables or the fruits that we consume are of hybrid in nature. So artificial hybridization is one of the widely used method for crop improvement, but it is not exactly explaining the assertion statement. So I would go with is it explaining? I don't think so it is explaining. So I would go with the second statement. Both assertion and reason are true, and or is not an explanation of the assertion statement. Let's go for the next one. The innermost wall layer of microsporangium is the endothecium. The innermost layer is not endothecium. What is it? Tapetum. What is it? Tapetum. So this statement assertion is wrong. The innermost wall layer of microsporangium nourishes the developing pollen grains. The innermost wall layer, that is tapetum, nourishes the pollen grains, which is true. Okay, which is true or false? Which is true? Which is true? Completely true. So I would go with assertion as the false and reason as a statement true. So the answer will be the fourth one, that is assertion is false and reason is true. Assertion is false and reason is true. Next question. The distribution of bryophytes and pteridophytes is limited. Yes, geographically only in few regions we'll see the bryo and pteridophytes. What is the reason? The reason is the bryophytes and pteridophytes need water for the transportation of the male gametes and fertilization, which is true. So the answer is both of the statements are true, and indeed reason is the right explanation of the assertion. So I would go with A as the answer. I would go with A as the answer. Next question. A typical angiosperm embryo sac at maturity, though, is 8 nucleated and 7 cell. So it is a 7 celled and 8 nucleated condition, which is true. Which is true. A matured embryo sac contains 3 antipodal cells at chalazal end, 2 synergids and 1 egg cell at micropylar end, and 2 polar nuclei as a part of the large central cell, which is true. And this is the reason why it is called as a 7 celled and 8 nucleated condition. So both the statements are true and it is indeed the right explanation. I would go with A as the answer. I would go as A as the right answer. Next, let's see the next question. What does it state? The placenta is inside the ovarian. The placenta is located inside the ovarian cavity of the flower. Ovarian cavity of the flower, which is true. Which is true, isn't it? Which is true. And let's see the reason. Inside the ovary, the cavity is called as locule. Both the statements are true, but it is not a correct explanation of the assertion statement. So I will go with B as the answer. I would go with B as the answer. Next one. Endosperm development precedes embryo development in plants. Yes, first endosperm, which is the nourishing material, that is formed. Later on the embryo will develop, which is true as a statement. Which is true as a statement. Let's see the reason. The cells of endosperm tissue are filled with reserve food materials and are used for the nutrition of the developing embryo. That's the reason why endosperm forms first and later the embryo develops. So I would say both of them are true as statements, and indeed it is the right explanation as well. Indeed it is the right explanation as well. So I would go with A as the answer. I would go with A as the answer. Next one. Next one. Most fruits develop only from the ovary and are called as false fruits. Most fruits develop only from ovary. Until here the statement was fine, it is true, and are called false fruits. If it is developing from the ovary, Why on earth we call them as false fruits? So we call them as true fruits. So assertion is false. Assertion is false. Why? It should have been. It should have been true, then it would have been correct. So I would go this statement as false, and strawberry is a false fruit, which is true. Which is true. So the answer is assertion is false and reason is true. Reason as a statement is true. So the 13th question answer is D, option D. Clear? So there are few typing errors. The second option is not a correct explanation. Next one. Next one. A typical dicotyledonous embryo consists of an embryonal axis and two cotyledons. That's the reason why. That's the reason why it is called dicotyledonous. So it is true. The portion of the embryonal axis above the level of cotyledons is called as hypocotyl. No, it is called as epicotyl. It should be called as epicotyl. So the reason statement is false. The reason statement is false. So what would be the answer for the 14th question? The answer will be 3. The answer will be the 3 or the C statement. Clear, guys? Hello? Hello? Are you following? Next. Next. Integuments encircle the nucellus. Integuments encircle the nucellus in an ovule except at the tip where a small opening called the chalaza is organized. No, chalaza is the opposite end. Okay, so the opening region is called as micropyle, right? So this statement is false. This statement is false. Let's see the reason statement. Opposite to the chalazal end is the micropylar end in the ovule of the flower, which is true. Which is true. So the answer will be assertion is false and reason is true. Assertion is false and reason is true. Let's see the next question. Flowers produce enormous amount of pollen grains in wind and water pollinated plants. True or false? True or false? Tell me why. Because wind and water pollination is by chance. So when you are taking chance, that means you need to throw a number of the stones, right? If you are not going to aim exactly a particular fruit and you are not sure whether it's going to hit or not, you have to throw a number of stones. In a similar manner, air pollination and water pollination is a chance. It occurs by chance. So if it is occurring by chance, that means you need to release n number of pollen grains, which is true as a statement. Let's see reason. What does reason says? Pollen grains are coming in contact with the stigma is a chance factor in both wind and water pollination, which is beautifully explaining the assertion statement. So I would go with A as the answer. I would go with A as the answer. Both assertion and reason are true, and indeed a reason is the correct explanation for the statement assertion. Let's move on to the next question. Let's move on to the next question. Viola produces two types of flowers. Viola produces two types of flowers, that is chasmogamous and clistogamous. Clistogamous and chasmogamous. Is it true or false? Is it true or false? It is true. It is true. Clistogamous flowers do not open at all. Yes, this is also true. But The reason statement is not explaining why in the first case Viola is doubling both the open flowers and the closed flowers. So I would go both the statements A and R are true, and R is not the correct explanation, or is not the correct explanation of the assertion statement, So I would go with B as the answer. Let's see the next question. When the pollen grain is mature, it contains two cells, that is the vegetative cell and generative cell, which is true as a statement. The vegetative cell is small and floats in the cytoplasm of the generative cell, which is written the other way around. So the vegetative cell is rather large, and the generative cell is small, which floats in the cytoplasm of the vegetative cell. It is the other way around. So the vegetative cell is not small, it is large, and floats in the cytoplasm of the generative cell. No, generative cell, which is small, floats in the cytoplasm of the vegetative cell. So it is the generative cell that floats in the cytoplasm of the vegetative cell. So this statement is false. So what will be our answer for 18th question? The answer will be the third statement, C statement. Assertion is true and reason is false. So generative cell is small, floats on the cytoplasm of the vegetative cell. Next. Angiosperms exhibit double fertilization. Let's see whether the reason statement is explaining the assertion or not. In angiosperms, two fusion events occur, one in embryo sac, namely syngamy, and the other one is triple fusion with the polar nuclei. As you know, we have two generative cell nuclei. If this is your embryo sac, two generative cell nuclei are released. One would fuse with the egg cell, which we call it as syngamy. The other nuclei will fuse with the two polar nuclei, 1 plus 1 plus 1. So it is a triple fusion. So yes, both the statements are true. And indeed the reason is explaining the assertion statement. So I would go with A as the answer. That both the assertion and reason statements are true, and it is the right explanation as well. Chalo, let's move on to the next one. Occurrence of more than one seed in a fruit is referred to as polyembryony. Occurrence of more than one seed in a fruit is referred to as polyembryony. No, it is false. More often, in many citrus and mango varieties, some of the nucellus cells surrounding the embryo sac start dividing, protrude into the embryo sac, and develop into the embryo sacs, which is true, which is true. So I would go with the answer. Assertion is false and reason is true. Assertion is false and reason is true. And reason is true. You want to double check? Okay. Let's see the next question. Let's see the next question. The MMC undergoes meiotic division. Meiosis of MMC results in the production of the two megaspore. So the megaspore mother cell undergoes two meiotic divisions. Which is true. Meiosis of MMC results in the production of two megaspores. No, four. We'll end up with 4. So the statement reason is false. The statement reason is false. The answer will be the C statement. Assertion is true and reason is false. Assertion is true and reason is false. Let's see the next statement. Pollen grains are well preserved as fossils. Yes. The exene layer of pollen grain is made up of sporopollenin, which is one of the most resistant organic materials known, and that's the reason why they can be preserved for a very long time, because there is no known material which can degrade exene layer easily. So I would go as both the statements as true. Both the statements are true, and reason is indeed beautifully explaining the statement reason. The reason is explaining the assertion statement. So I would go with A as the answer. Chalo, let's go for the next one. 23rd question. What does it state? It is possible to store pollen grains of a large number of species for years in liquid carbon dioxide. No, it's not carbon dioxide. Liquid nitrogen you can store which is cryo preservation, not in carbon dioxide. Okay, not in carbon dioxide. Assertion is false. Stored pollen grain can be used as pollen banks similar to seed banks in crop breeding programs, which is true. So I would go with assertion as false and reason as true, which is the D. D is the answer for 23rd question. Clear? Let's go for the next one. Gynoecium that have more than one pistil is called as multicarpellary. The gynoecium that have more than one pistil is called as multicarpellary, which is true indeed. Let's see the reason. When there are more than one pistil in gynoecium, they may be fused, together or free, which is true, but it is not explaining why we are using those. So I would say both these statements are true, and R is not a correct explanation of the assertion. So I would go with B as the answer. Clear? Hello? Next one. Geitonogamy is genetically similar to autogamy. I hope everybody knows what I mean to say here. Imagine there are two flowers of the same plant. Imagine this is a male flower and this is a female flower. Which is, let me represent like this, and this is the male flower. If the pollen grain from this falls onto the stigma of the different flower of the same plant, that is called as geitonogamy. Since this pollen grain and the egg cell is from same plant, genetically they are same, which is a kind of a autogamy, So I would say both the statements are true, and not both the statement. Let me say first, I haven't read even the reason. First statement, geitonogamy is genetically similar to autogamy, which is true. Let's see the next statement, okay, whether it is explaining or not. Geitonogamy is a type of pollination in which pollen grains come from a different flower of the same plant, which is beautifully explaining the assertions. So I would say A as the answer. Clear? Next one. Next one. Statement based questions. In very few of the flowering plants, one of the megaspores formed from the MMC is functional while the other three degenerate. Okay, let me divide this statement into two parts. Okay, over here. Okay, so in very few of the flowering plants, one of the megaspores formed from MMC is functional while the other three degenerate, which is true. But he says very few. No, in almost all of them that's what happens. So I would say, okay, the statement 1 is incorrect. Only, okay, this part is right. But in very few, he said, no, most of them, okay, 3 would degenerate, only 1 would become functional. Let's see the second statement. Only the functional megaspore develop into the female gametophyte in flowering plants, which is true. So statement 1 is incorrect, statement 2 is correct. So C would be our answer. Let's see the next question. Transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of a different plant is called as autogamy. Guys, do you think it is true? See, what is he saying? The transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of a different plant is called autogamy. No, it is called as xenogamy. Not as auto. So this statement would be false. Let's see the next one. Let's see the second statement. What does it state? The only type of pollination which occurs during pollination brings genetically different types of pollen grains to the stigma is called as geitonogamy. The only type of pollination which during pollination brings genetically different types of pollen grains to the stigma is called as geitonogamy. No, just now I told you xenogamy. So both the statements are incorrect. I would go with, okay, fourth one as the answer. Next one. Hydrilla grow in fresh water and is water pollinated. True. Zostera is a marine plant that is pollinated by water. True. So both the statements are correct. Next one. If the female parent produces unisexual flowers, there is no need for emasculation during artificial hybridization. Imagine if there is only female flowers. Okay, that means no need to, okay, there is no, what do you say? You need not remove, okay, they are not present anyways. So There is no need for emasculation, which is true as a statement, which is true as a statement. Let's see the second statement. The female unisexual flowers are bagged after the flower buds open during artificial hybridization. Arabai, there is nothing that we can do if flower is open up. Okay, you do emasculation and bagging before the flower, okay, completely opens up. So this is wrong. So I would go with B as the answer. Statement 1 is correct and statement 2 is incorrect. Statement 1 is correct and statement 2 is incorrect. Let's see the next question. Let's see the next question. The process of formation of microspores from a pollen mother cell through meiosis is called as microsporogenesis, which is true. The microspores, as they are formed, are arranged in a cluster of 4 cells called as microspore tetrad, which is true as well. So I would say both the statements are correct. So option A will be your correct answer. Option A will be your correct answer. Next one. Let's see the next question. Triple fusion is the fusion of the 3 haploid nuclei during fertilization in flowers. True. True. 10 primary endosperm nucleus is the outcome of the triple fusion in flowers. Triple fusion in flowers. So I would say both the statements are true. I would say as both the statements are correct. So option A will be your answer. Option A will be your answer. Let's see the next statement. Let's see the next statement. The early stages of embryo development are different in monocotyledons and dicotyledons. No, only the later part will be different. So this is false. This is false. Let's see the second statement. The zygote gives rise to the proembryo and subsequently to the globular, heart shape and matured embryo in angiosperms. So I would say statement 1 is incorrect and statement 2 is correct. So option C will be your answer. Option C will be your answer. Is it clear? Hello? Is it clear? Next. Let's see the next question. Production of self-incompatible pollen grains is an outbreeding device for the flowering plants. Is an outbreeding device. Yes, in order to avoid what? Autogamy, plants will develop self-incompatible pollen grains, which is true. Which is true. Which is true. Continued cross-pollination results in inbreeding depression. No, continued self-pollination, okay, would lead to the inbreeding statement. So if it is cross-breeding, cross-pollination will not lead for inbreeding. Rather, cross-breeding is encouraged for the variation. So this statement is false. So statement 1 is correct and statement 2 is incorrect. Statement 1 is correct and statement 2 is incorrect. Let's see the next question. Let's see the next question. The papaya plant shows monoecious condition as they are either male or female. As they are either male or female. What do you say, guys? Okay. The papaya condition, okay. You know there is this condition. Monoecious or bisexual, dioecious or unisexual. So papaya are unisexual plants, not bisexual. Okay, papaya is unisexual. That is, male and female plants will be separate. Males and female plants will be separate. So the plants show dioecious or unisexual as they are either male or the female. So for this one, statement 1 is incorrect. Statement 1 is incorrect. Let's see the second statement. Autogamy and geitonogamy are prevented in papaya plants because it is a unisexual plant, which is true. So is there any option that goes with that? Statement 1 is incorrect, and statement 2 is correct. So answer will be the third option. Answer will be the third option. Statement 1 is incorrect. Statement 2 is correct. Clear? Hello? Let's go for the next question. Let me grab some water before you read that question. Let's see what does this question says. The nucleus of the functional megaspore undergoes 3 mitotic divisions to form a matured embryo. The nucleus of the functional megaspore undergoes 3 mitotic division to form a matured embryo sac, which is true. After the first mitotic division of the nucleus of the functional megaspore, the 2 nuclei move to the opposite poles, which is true as well. So I would go with both the statements are correct. I would go with both the statements are correct. Let's see the next question. In most of the water pollinated species, pollen grains are protected from wetting by a mucilaginous covering. Yes, if that is not there, what will happen? It becomes heavier and it goes deep into the water and may not be available for the pollination at all. Both wind and water pollinated flowers are not very colorful and do not produce nectar. Yes, okay, which is true. So I would go with A as the answer. Both the statements are correct. Both the statements are correct. Next. Let's see the next question. In the grass family, the cotyledon is called a scutellum, which is true. Okay, grass, which is a monocotyledonous plant. Okay, in grass family, the cotyledon is called as scutellum. In the remaining monocots, it is simply called as cotyledon. Only in grasses, it is called as a scutellum. That is the axis situated towards the one side of the embryonal axis. Towards the one side of the embryonal axis, which is true. In the embryo of a monocot plant, epicotyl has a shoot apex and few leaf primordia, which is true. Which is true. Which is true. So I would go with both the statements are correct. Both the statements are correct. Since reproductive processes such as pollination and fertilization are mostly dependent of water, in angiosperms, seed formation is more dependable. Come again. Since reproduction processes such as pollination and fertilization are mostly dependent of water in angiosperms. No. If those are dependent on water, angiosperms would not have been widespread, okay, as we see right now. So they are not water dependent. So this statement is false. Let's see the second statement. Let's see the second statement. What does it state? What does it state? In angiosperms, seeds have better adaptive strategies for dispersal to new habitats and help the species to colonize in other areas, which is true. And that's the reason why some of the seeds have a kind of a rementa, so that it can fly off to different regions. And in some plants, okay, the seed is embedded into a fruit so that animal can distribute to, okay, larger areas. So I would say statement 1 is incorrect and statement 1 is incorrect. Statement 2 is correct. Which one is that? Option C. Option C will be your answer. Let's see the next question. Let's see the next question. Majority of insect pollinated flowers are small, colorful, fragrant and rich in nectar. Majority of the insect pollinated flowers are small, colorful, fragrant and rich in nectar. This is not. Okay, they need, okay, a landing place, right? So I would say statement 1 is incorrect. I would say statement 1 is incorrect. Okay, let's see the statement 2. When the flowers are large, a number of flowers are clustered into an inflorescence to make them conspicuous for the pollination by insect. Arey, if the flower is large enough, wow, what is the need of grouping up? No, when the flowers are small, that's when the need arises to form the group. So I would say even the second statement is false. So answer is both the statement 1 and statement 2 are incorrect. Both the statement 1 and statement 2 are incorrect. So the answer will be option D. Next question. Pollen grains represent the male gametophytic generation. Obviously true. Pollen grains are stored in the pollen sac that develops from megasporangium. No, microsporangium. So the second statement will be wrong. So I would go with statement 1 is correct and statement 2 is incorrect, which is our option B. Let's go for the next question. The pollen grain germinates on the stigma to produce The pollen grain germinates on the stigma to produce a pollen tube through one of the germ pores, which is true. Pollen tube, after reaching the ovary, enters the ovule through chalaza. No, as all of you are aware, it is through micropyle. So this statement is false. So statement 1 is correct and statement 2 is incorrect. So that would be our answer. Let's see the next question. The ovules have a stalk called as pedicel. No. Okay, which is funicle. What is pedicel? Stalk of the flower is called as pedicel. What do you call the stalk of the leaf? Which is called as petiole. So statement 1 is incorrect. Okay, the ovules have a stalk called as funicle. Then it would be correct. Let's see the second statement. What does it say? Protective coverings of the microsporangium are called as integuments. No, not for microsporangium. It is megasporangium. So both the statements are incorrect. So option D will be our right answer. Next, let's see the next question. The events from pollen deposition on the stigma until fertilization of gametes are together referred to as pollen pistil interaction. The events from pollen deposition on the stigma until the fertilization of the gametes are together represented as the pollen pistil interaction. True or false? What does it say? The events from pollen disposition on the stigma until fertilization of the gametes are together referred to as pollen pistil interaction. No, once it lands on the stigma, then it is called as a pollen pistil interaction. So I would go with the statement 1 is incorrect. I would go with statement 1 as incorrect. Let's see the second statement. Pollen pistil interaction is a static process involving pollen recognition followed by promotion of inhibition of the. No, this particular inhibition is wrong. It is not static, either it is dynamic, it is very pragmatic. It depends, they communicate continuously. So both the statements are incorrect. I would go with D as the answer. I would go with D as the answer. As the seed matures, its water content is reduced and seeds become relatively dry. And becomes, but this value is okay, wrong. So this is false. The transformation of ovules into seeds precedes the transformation of ovary into fruits. No, the other way around. So this is false as well. So I would say both the statements are incorrect. Both the statements are incorrect. Let's see the next question. Rather, the last question. Let's see the last question. In about 40% of the angiosperm, pollen grains are shed at the two-celled stage. No, false, the other way around. In over 60% of the angiosperm, the generative cell divides mitotically to give rise to the two male gametes before pollen grains are shed. No, false. Both the statements are incorrect. Both the statements are incorrect. Okay, let's see the first question once again. So when I say over here, okay, B, it is obviously it is not, okay, it is not a correct explanation. Okay, a little bit of typing error over here. Okay, not. Okay, so that's it for today, and I'll see you in the next class. Thank you.